and welcome to Cuppa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia. I'm an exercise physiologist. I am a doula. I am a mum to two girls, and I am doing this podcast to help mums and parents out there to feel like they're not alone, to spread awareness of things that happen when birthing. I create a platform for women to safely share their birthing and their parenting story, regardless of where they birth, whether it's a hospital birth, whether it's a planned C-section, whether it's birthing in a birth center or birthing at home with or without a midwife. It's all on Cuppa with a Doula. And every month I interview a professional in the field of pregnancy and birth. So far, I've had a student midwife, a birth photographer, a clinical nutritionist, a women's health physiotherapist, and Catherine Bell from the Birth Map. And all these experts come and share their knowledge on the podcast in the aim of raising awareness to important things related to pregnancy, birth, and parenting. So thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because it really helps me to reach more people and to help more parents and more mums out there. So please consider leaving a review or even sharing it, spread the word out there, Cuppa with a Doula. If you want to come on the podcast, there is a form in the show notes that you can use to get in touch with me, and then I will get back to you and we can record an episode together. Let's dive right in. If I had to summarize today's episode in just a few words, I would say it was all meant to be. In today's episode, Mel takes us through her incredible home birth, where she actually started going through the public system, and then it was all meant to be, by total chance, she heard about a home birth and what it was, and from that time, Mel knew that this was the way that her daughter was meant to come into this world. So she found a midwife that resonated with her. She educated herself. She worked hard, and she takes us through her incredible home birth. And you will see in this story that her labor wasn't straightforward. There was a bit of starting and fading away and so on. But as Mel puts it, it was the way that her daughter was meant to be birthed. And it is such an incredible and empowering story. A first-time mom going for a home birth and really listening to her body, listening to her intuition and tuning out the noise. A really must listen, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Hi, Mel. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Not a problem. So, do you want to start by introducing yourself? So, telling the listeners your name, where you're living, and who is in your family?
Yes. So I am a mama of one. I've got a nearly 2-year-old named Alaska, a daughter. And I live with my husband in just out of Newcastle in New South Wales. So right on the east coast. We're on a Awabakal country. Yeah, and that's our family. Oh, and we have 2 Labradors as well.
Beautiful. I love your daughter's name, Alaska. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it was a favorite of mine for a long time. So I'm so glad I got to use it.
Were you hoping she'd be a girl so you could use Alaska?
I reckon I would have used it regardless, because she always gets mistaken for a boy anyway. So I'm just like, I would still probably roll with it.
Okay, well, there you go. Too funny. So, did you always want to be a mum?
Yes. Yeah. I've been maternal since I can remember. And always, what are they called? Oh, I always used to take my baby borns everywhere and play mum and dads and stuff like that. So I've always wanted to be a mum, and I've always wanted to be a young mum.
Right. And why the young mum? Why did you want to be a young mum? Was it because, it's like, well, then, I've got a lot of energy, I've got my whole life ahead of me, or just no particular reason?
I think it was really I just couldn't wait. I
Okay.
just, I knew that that's what I always wanted to be. Like, I know some people you hear, they say, oh, I wasn't sure if I wanted to have kids. I was
Mm.
like 100% sure my whole life. Just felt so natural to me. So, yeah, always wanted to be a mama.
Oh, perfect. And so did you meet your now partner or husband early on, and then he was also on the same page with kids?
Yeah, so we have been together since we were like 14 and 15. And probably not till we were older, we had the discussion around like actually wanting kids. But yeah, he's always sort of been on the same wavelength. We've never disagreed on stuff like that anyway. And then I had my first when I was 22. Well, I fell
Wow.
pregnant with her when I was 22.
Yeah, right. So was that a planned conception at 22?
It's so funny. So we'd put out into the universe maybe a year before that we were like really, really wanted a baby. And I wasn't doing anything drastic. I probably like had a few pregnancy tests, and we just ended up saying, oh, it's not our time right now. And maybe a few months after that, I was relocating to Queensland and I found out I was pregnant. So that definitely put a spanner in the works. So
Wow.
we weren't actively trying at the time, but very much wanted.
Right. Oh, that's such a beautiful story. And so you found yourself relocating, moving interstate, and being pregnant. How was that? That wouldn't be easy to
Yeah.
navigate, maternity system and so on.
Yeah, no. So it was such a funny story. We had like COVID, obviously, and borders closing, and we tried during that whole time, and then we were like, okay, we'll try again. And then we were actually in Queensland looking for a house, and I was like sleeping in the back of our car. We had like a SUV, and I just
Yeah.
felt so uncomfortable, and I was getting these weird stabbing pains. And that's actually what triggered me. I was like, oh, maybe I need to have a test or something. And I thought it was just from like sleeping rough.
Yeah.
And after we found out, we ended up staying in New South Wales. So yeah, it didn't eventuate. And it was sort of like nature's way of telling us where we're meant to be, I think.
Too funny. So at 22, when you found out you're pregnant, do you know much about pregnancy, models of care, what to do when you find out you're pregnant?
At the time, compared to what I know now, no. But I think for my age, I did. So
Yeah.
I was really lucky that my experience with birth, I'd only ever heard one birth story, and it was my sister in law who birthed in our midwifery group practice
Yeah.
at the Natural Birth Centre. She had a really quick birth. She spoke about birth like it was natural, normal, a
Yeah.
great thing to do. So I naturally gravitated towards, I'll probably do the same. I didn't really know what other options were, and always just had in my head that I would birth there if the time came.
That's really good that you had, in your circle someone who had a positive birth story, not a traumatic one, not a, oh, this is what happened, and like all of that.
Yeah.
And then that really helped you to go, oh well, it's doable to have a positive, empowered birth. Amazing.
Yeah. My sister in law and my brother, when I told them I was pregnant, it was more so my brother. He was like educating me. He was like, you need to watch this video. You need to get onto Ina May Gaskin. And he was so funny. He was like the birth doula. And that just started my journey, really. Yeah, he was like telling me about OBs, and he's like, oh, look up why so many babies are induced around Christmas and all these things. It was just so funny. But yeah, that got me on the path that I was on. And I'm very grateful that I had only known birth to be a natural, normal thing. I didn't have to navigate those barriers of other people's stories or anything like that.
Yeah, that's right. And so did you try and get into the MGP that your sister-in-law got into to birth there?
Yeah, so it was I'm a big believer of like synchronicities and things just happening, flowing how they're meant to. That was my plan. And my sister, I think I was only like 8 weeks pregnant, I told her, and she brought me a ticket for a holistic pregnancy expo. It was just like a seminar. And I went there, and one of the speakers was a local home birth midwife. And she pretty much just did a slideshow presentation of some birth photos. She spoke about home birth. And I think I was a minute in and I just was crying. And I said, oh, this is what I meant to do. Like, I didn't even know this was a thing. And
Wow.
she started off her presentation with, people actually ask me if my job's legal, like if being a home birth midwife is legal. And it is. People don't understand and people don't know about it. So I was really grateful again. That set me on the path of connecting with her, who ended up being my midwife.
Oh.
The video, I actually remember the video that like set it in stone for me, was a video of one of her mums that she'd recently supported in a birth, and she brought her baby up and she put her on her chest, and they just gazed into each other's eyes, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was how you birth. Like, I didn't know that you got to do that, and those special moments, and it was just so beautiful, and that set it for me. Like, I knew that that's where I had to be.
Wow, that is so funny. The way, as you said, synchronicity and being in the right place at the right time, the expo, the seminar being on right when you're really early in pregnancy, and you got tickets for that, and it just worked out
Yeah.
really beautiful. That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, I wouldn't have known otherwise. And I don't think, my journey would have been so different, so different, which we'll talk about when we talk about my birth story. But I just, I've played over in my head what that would have looked like in a different environment, and it just would have been so different to what I experienced.
Right. So at 8 weeks, you find your private midwife, and so she's obviously available, right, for your due date or your due month, and so that's how you start your antenatal care. Is that right?
Yeah, I engaged with her. I think we met up, maybe I was 14 weeks or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she pretty much just came over and said, look, usually it's more the partners that want me to come over and talk about how I work, and they can ask any questions, and I'll then go away and you can let me know if you feel like it's the right decision for you. She did also encourage me to still get the referral for the midwifery group practice and go and just have a meeting with them if I wanted to, and just so I could gauge how I felt about both options, which I did. So I did both, and I had my first meeting with her, and it was in my lounge room, and we had a cuppa, and we were wearing no shoes, and we were just sitting there, and I think we talked for like 2 hours. And then I did my initial appointment with the midwifery group practice, and it was still with COVID restrictions, so I had to have a mask and my temperature taken, and it was just such a different environment. And I straight away left that appointment and thought, no, this isn't where I feel most comfortable. So I didn't pursue that, and we went with the private midwife route to home birth.
Wow, that's beautiful. And so your partner was obviously on board with the home birth as well, right?
Yeah, he's so good with things like that. He's a knowledge seeker, so he's like the type of person that you'll tell him something and he'll like Google and actually really find the research and information. So when I come home from the seminar, I said, oh, I seen this home birth midwife and it was so amazing. And I'd love to speak to her more about like what it costs and like what you'd be looking at. And he said, okay, like give her a call. And then by the time she was about to leave for our first visit, she said, I go away now and you can just get in contact if you feel it's going to be the right option. And he said, oh no, like this is the right option. So he was the one that was like, yeah, like book it in. This is what we want to do.
Oh,
so yeah,
beautiful.
I was super lucky.
Yeah, that's really good because, sometimes it's the partner that needs a bit of convincing, really. But in your case, nope, no convincing needed.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. And so as you, I guess, as you met with your private midwife and you had all these antenatal appointments, you probably delve more into, what you wanted your birth to look like. How was that journey into, discovering options that you didn't know you had actually?
Throughout my pregnancy, I then just started to become the biggest birth nerd. So I think I watched and listened to every birth story or every birth video I could, obviously that aligned with what my birth choices were. And I just read. So by the end, it was just so funny. We included in our midwifery practice, package, my second midwife was a hypnobirthing instructor. So
Oh, yeah.
she come and did one-on-one or just in our home one-on-one sessions with us over like 6 weeks. So we did that. And then I also did, looking back on it, I definitely wouldn't do it again, but we did book in for like the hospital newborn and birth skills program, and it was just like a 2-day event. And I just remember being there, and my partner was like the one answering all the questions. So by the end, he was actually in the birth education course, like asking questions and like actually talking to the other women about birth. And it was just the funniest thing. And he just come along on the journey with me, and he was like working at a tire shop at the time, and he was coming home from work and saying that he was like sharing about home birth with his co-workers, and like a lot of them had unfortunately experienced like quite traumatic births with their wives and in other settings. So he was like, oh, you should look into home birth and hypnobirthing. And it was just hilarious to ride along on that journey with him. So yeah, we both was such a transformational pregnancy, really.
That's amazing. And it's amazing that, so you're a first time mom, and, you somehow get put onto the path of home birth, and then you did hypnobirthing. So obviously
Yeah.
you're preparing for physiological, no drugs, obviously no intervention birth, and you're not scared. I mean, you don't have any fears around, oh, but what if I can't handle, the pain? What if I can't handle the contractions? What if I need an epidural? So you had none of that, right?
No. A lot of the things I spoke to my midwife about, I was like, oh, tearing. I did hear throughout my pregnancy people be like, well, what if you tear? Like you can't be at a home birth with that. Like you have to go get surgery, and just like all this misinformation. And she just educated me on her statistics and the types of tears. And she actually told me this line around, I've heard it a lot of times now after, but the skin is like the skin on the inside of your mouth, and it actually naturally heals really well within a couple of days. And that actually did happen to me. They probably said like a level 2 when they checked me over after birth, and she gave me the option if I wanted to get stitches or anything, and I just said I'd let it heal naturally, and it healed beautifully. I didn't have to do anything.
That's really interesting. And so were you one of the first ones in your group of friends to be pregnant? I mean, obviously your sister-in-law had a baby and you knew about her birth, but did you know anyone else around you who was pregnant at the time, had a baby, or not really?
Yeah, not really. I was the first in my friend group, and then after I gave birth, I noticed that a lot of people I went to school with and things like that, we all sort of were pregnant at the same time and all had like July babies. So I've got a small group of friends that we have like babies the same age. But yeah, I was the first sort of in my immediate friend group.
Wow. And that's impressive, how you navigated this, maternity birthing options, and you found yourself in a home birth, and the education you did to help yourself to have the most, natural physiological birth, and being, the only one in your friend circle, it couldn't have been easy to do this. And did it feel lonely to be, the first one in your friend circle and not really have people who can relate to you, I guess?
Not so much. Like, I'm also Indigenous, and a lot really through that pregnancy, I was tuning into like my ancestors and like what innately we've done for 65,000 years, right? So I didn't feel like lonely or isolated, and I really just developed through that just a deep trust and connection. And it's definitely, now I'm pregnant for the second time, another place where I've gone back to, where I've just gone back and I felt safe, and I felt like this is just a natural experience of being. That's what we've done forever. So no, I didn't ever feel like, even with my birth choices, didn't ever feel like the odd one out or anything like that. Like I'm quite confident in my decisions and being able to advocate for myself. So it just felt really natural to me to take that progression.
Wow, beautiful. You just sound, you're just so mature for your age. I just want to say that. You sound so mature for your age. That's perfect. That is beautiful. You prepared for your birth, so you did hypnobirthing, you educated yourself, your midwife, helped you to fill in the gaps. What else did you do to prepare? Did you read a lot of books? Did you do podcasts maybe?
Yeah, birth podcast was such a huge contributor to my birth, and obviously listen to the ones that are going to be aligned to you or the birth choices that you're going to make. I think by the time I gave birth, I had listened to hundreds of birth stories, and not so much for the inspiration, or I love listening to them, but I loved hearing multiple variations of birth. And I love knowing that some people can have a 3-hour birth and some people can have a birth over multiple days. And by the time I gave birth, I was really accepting of whatever would unfold for me. And because I'd listened to so many variations of normal and I was prepared for it. And it was crucial with the labor that I ended up unfolding for me. It was so crucial. And it was just so ironic that I remember the last birth story I listened to before I went into labor, and it was a mum who was on her 3rd baby, I think, and she kept saying, they tell you like your 2nd and your 3rd are going to be quicker labors, but every labor she's been in it for 3 or 4 days. And I was like, oh wow, like you've got to be prepared for that, or that would be difficult. And then that's ended up what unfolded for me as well. So I felt really grateful that I had dove into all of those variations so I could be as prepared as possible.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right. It's I find, podcasts and even written birth stories and so on, and birth videos, they're just so good at showing you what, as you said, birth variations, how birth can be so different, labor can be different. Some people are in pre-labor for days, but then their actual active labor is really quick, whereas some people have a short pre-labor and a really long active labor, and then sometimes they require maybe some transfer or things like that. But yeah, it's important to just know, and especially when, well, you don't know, you didn't know anything about birth, that was your first one, so it's good to just know what could happen, and again, not knowing what's coming for you, really.
Yeah. Well, my sister-in-law was like, she pretty much got to the hospital and baby was out. Like she labored as long as she could at home, probably a bit too long. And I was manifesting a birth like that. I was like, please gods, but I was prepared if it didn't go like that.
Amazing. So who did you want present at your birth? So obviously your partner, your midwife. Did you have any other support people that you wanted there to help you?
I was really drawn to just having a quiet, dark, comfortable birth. I didn't feel like I wanted anyone else there. Even I was like, oh, I don't want a birth photographer. I just didn't want any more energy in the room. And what ended up happening was when I was about 30 weeks pregnant, I met my second midwife. And in home birth, if you don't know, pretty much they're just there as a backup when the baby's born. Just legally, they've got to have 2. So I did meet her to do a hypnobirthing, and she was actually my neighbor growing up. She was quite older than me, but she'd known me for like 20 years, and we hadn't connected in like 10 years. So it was just so crazy. Yeah. And now we have the most beautiful relationship. Like she was just so amazing in my birth, and she brought her camera along, obviously with my consent, and she snapped some photos, and I was just so grateful that she was there. So yeah, I just had my midwife, my second midwife, and my partner, or my husband now.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, right. Beautiful. And so now take us through this incredible labor. What happened and how did it unfold?
Oh, I've nearly got a 2-year-old, and it just feels like it was, I can't believe it's been 2 years, and I still get like the fuzzies just thinking about it. And I think this is the thing that I always say when I share my story is like, birth doesn't have to go exactly how you hoped it would or like what you expected, but you can still have a beautiful birth. Like, and I come out the other side of mine, like I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. So I got to, I think I was 42 and 4 days, something around then. And I actually navigated the end of my pregnancy really well. I was like moving a lot. I was going to the pool and swimming at night. I just loved just like getting in I had a winter baby, so I'd get in the heated pool and just literally sometimes just squat or like lunge on the bottom of the pool, and it just felt so good to be active. And every night from maybe like 38 weeks, especially if I'd gone to the pool that night, I had really intense like tightening. So I was like, oh, maybe tonight could be the night. And that just continued. I was so prepared to go to 42 weeks like pregnancy. I was so prepared. Even at work, I was joking with them being like, no, I'll be pregnant for 43. Like, I'll still be here. And they were all laughing. So I got to about 42 weeks and I was doing really well. I did have really bad like heartburn and I just couldn't sleep. I tried everything. So towards like the last couple of nights, I just remember sitting up and crying and just like whinging about how awful it was. And then I was very committed to like, baby just comes. I'm not going to do anything like huge to try and get them out or anything like that. But I did at 42 and 4, I booked an acupuncture appointment. And at 3 a.m. on the morning of the day of that appointment, I woke up. I did have 3 a.m. wake ups like the whole of my pregnancy, but I woke up and I could feel something different going on. So I was like, okay. And I was like, yep. This is probably today. I'm going to send my partner to work and just continue on my day. So I did go to my acupuncture appointment and I was like, I'm going to get groceries after just so I've got all my stuff at home sorted. And when I sat in the appointment and actually sat down still, I was like, oh, yeah, these are definitely something happening. They're not just, preparation tightenings or anything. And I just sort of wrote it out that day. And I remember by about 6 p.m. I was over at my brother and sister-in-law's and my little niece was like climbing on me and I was getting to the point where I was like uncomfortable and getting irritated. I was like, ugh. So I headed home and my husband got home from work and we were like, all right, let's set our birth pool up. And I did just let my midwife know, like, hey, I've had like very mild tightenings all day, but I think something's going to happen over the next 24 hours. And then at about 7 p.m., I started getting like my first sort of surges where I was like, okay. And I started purging. So I'd have a surge and then I'd be like straight vomiting, like just everything up. And I remember, and I had to just sit on the toilet and just release my bowels. I was just, after every surge, that was sort of like my circuit I was doing. And I remember saying to my husband, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this the whole time. And he was like a bit worried. But I was like, oh, I hope the whole labor I don't just keep vomiting because this is really full on. And then by 11 p.m., I didn't have like that vomiting urge or anything anymore, but I was like earphones in, all the lights off, sent my husband to bed, and I was really excited. Like I was so excited just to put my earphones in and labor on my own. It was just like I just can't explain it. It's just like my place. I just felt so in the zone. And I labored all night, and I think I looked at the clock at like 7 a.m. when it was starting to get light, and they started to fizzle out. Which I was pretty prepared for. And throughout that day, I probably just had them every like 5 minutes and I rode that day out. And then as soon as the sun went down, it happened again. So that was on the Wednesday that all happened. The Wednesday night, I did the exact same circuit. So I labored all night by myself, couldn't sleep or like lay down or sit. The only sort of sitting position I could do was like on the birth ball. And I was really struggling to eat or drink anything. It just felt like just couldn't stomach anything. So yeah, I did the Wednesday night and the Thursday night like that. And then by the Friday morning, I was so defeated. I remember the sun coming up and then fizzling out. And I just started getting on Google and getting onto like Dr. Google and the worst thing you can possibly do in labor. And I was like researching long labor and it was like, you should be in hospital having a C-section. And I was just, really getting in my head. I purposely didn't call my midwife to come straight away because I really liked the idea of laboring on my own. And I wanted to use like all the tools that I had before I reached out for extra support. So by the Friday morning, I knew I was close, but I was just so defeated because I hadn't slept in 2 nights.
Yeah.
And I was out on my back deck in the sun, and I was starting to like, not roar as in like when you're pushing baby out, but I was starting to really moan through them. So I knew that things were sort of happening, but I was getting to the point where I was like, I definitely need someone here. So my second midwife came over and we did a day of just trying to relax and going through hypnobirthing, and that was so amazing. And then by about 4 p.m. on the Friday, my midwife came and she just wanted to check Bub and stuff like that. And she pretty much just watched me and said, "Oh, you're having a baby today." And I was like, "Am I?" And I went from being just so defeated and so down in the dumps, and I had my dressing gown on, and I was just like, I was thinking that she was going to say, like, we have to transfer or something like that. And then as soon as she said that, I just had this thing of energy. And she just said, "We're going to put the TENS machine on you. We're going to set you up on the lounge, nice and cozy, and we're going to let you rest. And you just get in contact with us. Things are going to happen tonight." So pretty much they left, and within 5 minutes of them leaving, I think it was like maybe 5 or 10 minutes, I just was like, I cannot sit down. This is so full on. I had been in the pool that day just sort of relaxing and trying to get some rest while we were doing some hypnobirth. So the pool was full, but it was cold by that point. And I just remember jumping up off the lounge, and I said to my husband, "Wake up, you need to heat the birth pool up." And I just had this urge, like I just needed to get in there. And I pretty much, I gave birth in July, so it was so cold, and I just jumped in this cold birth pool, and my waters broke. And I was like, okay, this is why I have this sudden urge. And things just ramped up like so intense. And from there it literally felt like 2 hours. Like I think it was maybe like 4 o'clock by the time they left, and I gave birth at 11:30. So for me, it only felt like a really short period of time. But pretty much, my husband started getting pots and pans because we were out of hot water. So he was on the stove, like heating up my water, and I was just in the birth pool, like going really primal. And I think he started to he looked at me at one point and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then we called our midwives back. My second midwife was closer, so she come back and she walked in the door and she was like, "Oh, yes, I'm going to call Karen, the midwife, to sort of like get a move on." She supported me, and before I knew it, I was in transition, which for me was really quick. It was probably, I had quite a few surges where mentally I felt like my body wasn't handling it. I was like starting to shake and just really fatigued, and I was getting out of that really positive mindset. And I wanted to say, like, I don't think I can do this, but I did end up saying, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And then I had one more surge and the pressure just went, and it was the biggest relief. And that's when I knew I'd sort of transitioned to like pushing, had that real bearing down feeling. What actually got me through that point, I didn't have a birth comb, but I had like a spiky massage ball, and she just my midwife just put it into my hands, and that just let me like get all the energy out that I was feeling. Like I was shaking my hands, and that was just a life changer. It was so amazing for me. And from that point I just feel like it was so quick. My midwife came in, I think it was, she literally videoed as she walked in the door, and the video was like 6 minutes. So by the time she come in, she said, she could sort of see I was bearing down, and she'd asked if I felt like that burning feeling yet, and I was like, no, not yet. But I loved the pushing phase. I just had this relief, and I was laughing, and I was like eating. I could finally eat again, and I've got photos, and I'm just laying back and I'm eating an ice block, and it was just I loved it. It was just such a relief. And then every surge I sort of had a bit more of a urge to push, and just really slowly, bit by bit, her head would come out, and she just sort of laid there for a little bit, and I was feeling her hair, and then a couple minutes later her shoulder sort of come out. I think she had one ear out, and then in the next push she turned her shoulders and just came out. So my husband and I both pulled her up out of the birth pool, and she did have her cord around, I think, twice, and then she was like crisscrossed over her back like a backpack. It was so funny.
Oh, yes.
And we just both calmly, like, I think my husband like helped her arms out, and I got her cord from around her neck. And then, yeah, I just put her straight on my chest, and it was just the most amazing feeling. And especially after being in that birth portal for so long, it was just so amazing to finally have her here. Yeah, and we just sat in the birth pool and looked at each other, and she didn't really cry straight away. I sort of was like aware that I might need to stimulate her if I was worried or anything, but she was fine. She did like a little dolphin squeal. It was like really funny. And yeah, it was completely undisturbed. I think the only time that I did ask to move from the birth pool because I was getting cold after, and I don't know if it was maybe half an hour after I birthed her, we just sat in the pool looking at each other, and then I did get out and I got on my lounge and I started breastfeeding her. Yeah, and then we just laid there, and while I was breastfeeding her, my midwife was just sort of like having a little observation of her, and everything was fine. And then, yeah, I had to birth my placenta, which I didn't like that. After that, I was like, oh, I didn't like the placenta. I think it was maybe an hour after I gave birth, and I had the first breastfeed, and my midwife gave me like a little massage on my stomach, and yeah, then I birthed it. And I was like, oh, thank gosh, it's over now. Yeah, and we just sort of like soaked in all the newborn bubble, and they made sure I had a meal, and they made sure I had a tea. And my husband he was so cute. I got new sheets, and he made the bed with our new sheets, and he put the electric blanket on so it was warm for when we got in. And I had my first shower and just made sure all that stuff was fine. And I did mention earlier, I did get checked just to see if I had any tearing or anything. And my midwife just said, oh, you've probably got like a category 2. Here are your options. And I was just straight away like, no, I just prefer to let it heal naturally, which I did. And she just said pretty much full about my activity over the next couple of days, which I absolutely was. And yeah, then I had a shower, and then I snuggled into bed with her, and it was just so surreal, like getting her into bed. I remember being like, oh, do I put a blanket on her? I'm like, do I wrap her in a blanket? Or it was just so funny. And then we fed all through the night, but I had a knock at the door the next day, and I'm thinking it's like 9 a.m. and it was like 3 p.m. and it was my midwife just coming to do her check. And we opened up the blinds, and I was like, oh, it's like actually like afternoon. We've just like slept. We just had this huge sleep. Like obviously we woke up for feeds, but yeah, it was just such a surreal 24 hours. And we breastfed, really easily. Didn't have any issues with latch or anything. So yeah, it was so beautiful.
That's amazing. That is an amazing birth story, and birthing at pretty much 43 weeks, right? Undisturbed. Your midwives were not, they were not pushing you to go to hospital and be checked or anything like that. They were just fine. Obviously, they did their observation. They could see everything was fine. Baby was fine. And just, it's your labor was just so almost erratic at first, and then once your waters broke, that was on, and it was like, okay, the show can now go on. And she was born, as you said, it wasn't that long once your waters broke, and your body was like,
no,
okay, now is a good time. That's beautiful. That is such an amazing and undisturbed birth where you just your mindset is amazing, because you were in labor for 3 days, which is so hard and it's exhausting, and you hadn't slept and so on, and yet you just kept going, and you didn't think, oh, I can't do it, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, you just went, okay, let's do it. That's amazing. Wow, good on you.
Yeah, I definitely on the Friday got there, and I just needed that, like, so I could just imagine my birth in another setting wouldn't have unfolded
Mm-hmm.
like that. I would have been on the
Mm-hmm.
clock, or I would have really
Yeah.
been pushed to move things along. And I could just imagine if my midwife was to come in and say, "Oh, we really, we really need to get things moving," or this, I just would
Mm-hmm.
have crumbled and said, "Let's just." I was at that point was already thinking I needed a C-section. Like, I just had
Yeah.
this thought in my mind. Not that I ever felt unsafe, or
Yeah.
I I didn't intuitively feel that, but I had let, like, fears creep into my mind. And once she come in and said, "Oh no, you're having a baby today or tonight," I was like, "What?" Like, okay, let's do it. Let's have the baby. And it was just the pick me
Wow.
up that I needed. I think the thing with home birth midwives is some of them are just incredible. They're incredibly knowledgeable, but they're
Yeah.
incredible at observation.
Exactly.
They're sitting on their hands until they are needed in very rare
Yep.
circumstances. So they
Exactly.
can sit there and they can really observe where a woman's at by just watching. They don't need to do
Exactly.
checks. They don't need to do things like that. They can
Mm.
just see where she's at in that labor with their observations. And now I've definitely noticed that. Yeah, I was just really lucky at a midwife like that allowed it to unfold the way it did. Yeah, it was just such a beautiful time. And I have heard people say, like, your birth teaches you so much. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
like, what's my birth taught me? And I've been thinking, like, oh, maybe parenting, like, around my daughter is I just got to be really patient and things like that. And now I've fell pregnant with my second, I understand exactly what it was teaching me. It was like, I can do it all on my own. That,
Yeah.
those days and nights of being in labor, just primal, with my
Yeah.
head down by myself, I thrived that. I loved that. And it's really given me, like, the confidence that I needed to go into my next birth. So I think that's what I've taken from it anyway. Yeah. So I don't know how the next one will unfold, but I'm just so excited to do it again.
Yeah, no, definitely, and we'll get how you're preparing for that next birth. But so after you had Alaska, how was your parenting journey? As you said, she was born, and it was a beautiful birth, undisturbed. You got to lay in your sheets, like you didn't have to stay on the postpartum ward and so on. How was your journey? Learning to be a parent,
Yeah.
learning all about Alaska, right?
Just it felt very natural to me. Obviously, like, the newborn phase was such a blur. I don't know if that's just every postpartum, or if it was just going from, I have heard people say going from none to one is
Yeah,
actually more of a shock than, like, the 1 to 2 or something. And I
yeah,
found that just like we're in a habit of waking up at like 8 p.m. and then
yeah,
being awake all night. And I remember there was nights where my partner and I we'd get up for the day, we'd have a shower, we'd like be like, okay, well, let's go get something to eat. And we looked at the time and it was 9 p.m. And we're like, oh, our sleeping patterns are so out of whack. So, yeah, it took a bit just to get into a bit of I don't really like to use routine,
yeah.
but get into the flow. I was really lucky that my husband, he had annual leave. So he took a month off. He
Oh,
took a month
good.
off annual leave, and then he took the 2 weeks, like, parental leave, and then two
Yeah.
weeks unpaid. So we actually had 2 months off. And the week we had her, we went into lockdown. So it was sort of like a blessing that it was just us, and we didn't have people,
Yeah.
like, coming to a house or anything like
Yeah.
that. And we could really just enjoy, like, the simplicity of it. You weren't pressured to, like, go out and go do
Yeah.
things because shops were open or anything like that. We just sort of, yeah, took it really slow. And again, like, I'm very aligned with just natural ways of being. So my parenting journey just flowed on from that. So I always did a lot of, like, she just spent so much time on my chest, breastfed on demand. I slept with her
Mm.
from birth, things like that. Just things that just, for me, felt
Yeah.
safe and natural, and yeah, it just felt like the best option. And I've
Mm.
still done that. She's nearly 2, and yeah, just really kept the mindset of just, like, slow mornings. And I've been very lucky that I haven't had to go back to full-time work or anything, so I really have that time just to be intentional with her and, yeah, take the time and just do what flows best for us.
That is such a beautiful parenting journey, just follow, as you said, following on from your daughter's cues and going, instead of, trying to fit a routine around her, trying to find what works for you and your husband and Alaska as a family, and trying to find that flow, that rhythm, as you said, because when you have a newborn, everything is out of whack, definitely. I feel like, your old routine or habits are very much changed from there on. So it's about trying to find what's the new, what is the new me, what is the new flow for our family, what works for us.
Yeah, and I now looking back, it's so funny. You're always learning, right? So
Yeah.
I thought I put so much effort in education into pregnancy and birth, and then I never really thought about the postpartum. And now I feel like really educated about postpartum, and I know that you can have meal trains, and I've learned a lot about like things like the Chinese sitting months and different cultural traditions around the world. I didn't know any of that in my first postpartum, which I'll really prioritize next time. Hopefully to get just so there's no pressure that I should be doing this, or I know it's actually culturally normal for most women to spend time in bed for the first month and in their home, and not have any pressure to have to be out doing things.
Exactly. No, that's
and
right.
definitely meal trains. That's my next one.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's we have so much to learn from other cultures. Like, I think I say that every chance I get on the podcast, but African cultures, we talk about having a village. What they don't talk about having a village, because to them that's normal. Like, they just surround the mum or the mum to be with people, with support, with nurture, with meals, with whatever it is she needs. It's normal to them. So, and we talk about having a village, but they just have it. That's just the norm for them. And we have so much to learn from that.
I think it was like the pygmies in Africa. There's been a researcher who's dedicated his career to actually observing them and researching them. And in his observations, he noticed that an infant has like 54 caregivers in a day. Within their village, there's like 54 adults or caregivers that are actually cuddling the baby, and their parenting practices are so interesting, where they're pretty much skin to skin with someone at all times.
Exactly.
If it's cold, the mum puts the blanket over her and the baby. It's just so interesting. I love delving into stuff like that. And like you said, we can learn so much from other cultures, and it's sad that especially with our Indigenous people, 65,000 years of practices has gone out the window. Now we have this medical model of care it's only 100 years young, right? So now this is seen as the way to go, but we don't ever look outside of that, and we've got some of the oldest cultures in the world that can teach us so much.
That's right. We're just brought up to believe that the hospital is the safest place, and anything outside of the hospital is not safe. And that's why when you look at the stats, 97% of women birth in the hospital, and then you've got 3% that either free birth or have a home birth, but it's not the norm at all, and it's almost frowned upon sometimes. And that's a shame, because we know that
to go
the hospital isn't always, it's not always the safest place, or it's not always the easiest place to get to. If we're talking about rural communities, that maybe their hospital is hours away from their home. How easy is it to get there when you're in labor, right?
Yeah. I agree.
So when did you start feeling ready to have another one? So how far along are you in your pregnancy, actually?
I am 11 weeks, so I'm nearly out of the first trimester. My daughter's nearly 2, and at about 18 months, we were like, oh, this is just the best age, and like it'd be such a cute age gap. And then she's always been quite advanced, like she's always been like very ahead. And she's a little fire sign, so she's like really learning her autonomy, and she's not afraid to like let you know what she thinks. So from just after we started having those thoughts, I started going, oh, okay, I might just ride this out to see how I can handle like the like the actual toddler stage.
Mm.
And I'm no kidding. The last 3 months, have been saying to everyone that asked me, oh, I could not. Like, I was like, I could 100% give birth again, but the parenting thing, I don't know if I could. Like, this is hard work, man. And little did I know, the reason I was finding it so hard was because I was already like 8 weeks pregnant. And we were really sick. We all got really sick, and we had pretty much a month that was just written off. And I didn't actually notice that I'd missed a period. And it was when I was like, really losing my marbles, my husband was like, you need to take a test. Like, we've seen this before. He's like, I've seen this
Mm.
before and I know what it is. And then I took a test and it all made sense. So I've definitely come to terms. We adapt. Individuals are just so incredible. Especially women, we just adapt. So yeah, I'm quite excited now, and I think it's going to be a really good age gap. Like, yeah, she's nearly 2 now, so she'll be like, yeah, getting on to 3, which, yeah, will just be so different. She'll be so much older, and yeah, dynamics will be changing.
Oh, amazing. So, yeah, it would have been the first trimester is never easy, but it's even harder when you have a toddler who's, demanding and they're a toddler. That's how you explain it. It's just a toddler.
Yeah, this is just, I didn't expect this, but I felt like my body really wasn't ready, and I was really worried. I was so sick in my first pregnancy. And I have had my second time round such a blissful time. I've
Oh.
actually really enjoyed being pregnant. I don't
Oh.
know. I don't know exactly. I can't exactly pinpoint the difference, but I know in my first pregnancy I was working a really stressful job. I was working like 45 hours a week. I was working 4 days, but doing like 10 to 11-hour days. So I was driving nearly an hour to get to work, and then coming home at like 7 o'clock at night and pretty much going to bed. Where this pregnancy, even though I've got a toddler, that's like, you don't really get the opportunity to rest. I didn't really have that in my first pregnancy anyway. And yeah, now that I'm nearly through the first trimester, I felt my energy's great. I am a little bit nauseous, but nowhere near. I'm not vomiting or anything like that. Just like managing it with snacking throughout the day. Yeah, and I'm still waiting. I'm like, oh, maybe next week the nausea will get worse, but it's actually starting to get better, which has been a really interesting thing, because I had a few days where I started to get worried. I was like, I don't feel sick. And for me, like, when you feel sick, like you've got a baby and you're feeling really pregnant. But I was starting to think like, oh, I don't feel sick, and I don't know. I was starting to like get nervous or worry, and I have opted not to have scans or anything. So really just trusting my intuition, and I just had to put that to the side and was like, I'm okay, everything's okay. But it's just been interesting to see it from the other side, just completely different to my first pregnancy.
Wow. So are you going through the route of a home birth again, maybe with your private midwife, or are you wanting to birth differently this time?
Yeah, so this time it's just, the journey is so interesting. So I'd always thought I'd either I'd always thought I'll always give birth at home, unless there was like something like twins or something like that. Now I think that's definitely my path. I couldn't do it any other way. And unfortunately, my midwife isn't practicing anymore. There are a lot more options in my area now post COVID, but I'd always thought I'd either birth at home or I'd explored free birth or birthing unassisted. And I wouldn't say I had fears, but I'd always just had like, I was unsure. And then when I found out I was pregnant, it was just like a lie. Like, that's just what I'm doing. Like, that's just my path. So my plan is to probably, free birth at home. I'd love to have a doula or a birth keeper there, mainly because what I really loved in my previous birth was like, especially around transition, just wise feminine woman there holding me and holding that space. And my husband's amazing, but I just loved that feminine energy and that support in that time. And that's sort of what I'd want out of a doula or birth keeper at my next birth. So that's the plan so far. Yeah, I haven't really thought anything more about it or about who I'd want to be there. So yeah, that'll all come on the journey, I think. But yeah, I'm really
Yeah.
excited. Just yeah, super excited to enter the birth portal again.
Oh, that's amazing. And with that first birth, well, at least you kind of know, as you said, you're super educated, you've done the hypnobirthing, you had your midwife there, you went through a 3-day basically labor. So, I mean, at this point, anything is possible really for you. You can pretty much do it all.
Yes, I'm very mindful that every birth's different. Yeah, but I'm just open to whatever that journey looks like for me.
Have you told Alaska that you're pregnant?
Yeah, I've she's funny because she's getting to the age where she can sort of understand, not pregnant, but like can understand that there's a baby in my belly, and she's really sweet. Yeah, really, really sweet. She touches the belly and stuff like that. I think more when I'm like actually pregnant,
Yeah.
and as she grows, like I know 2 to 3 is just such a crazy development year for them. By the time I
Yeah.
give birth, she'll be more aware, and I've even started to think about like birth preparation with her. Like, do I like
Yes.
show her videos or do I read books with her? I'm not sure what that'll look like, so I'll just gauge that towards the
Yeah.
end. But yeah, all that exciting stuff that I have to start thinking about with her and welcoming a sibling.
Yeah, and then you'll have to start thinking about whether you want her present, or maybe you might have someone to, look
Yeah.
after her, or maybe take her away, or you'll have to navigate that and figure out what you feel and she feels comfortable
Yeah.
with, I guess.
Yeah. I think I'd actually love to have her there. The dynamics of that
Yeah.
I don't know. And I think I
Yeah.
won't know until the day. Like you just don't know
No, no,
what
that's
I
right.
just know how like irritated I felt in labor, and but I have heard a lot of people say like their children were like their strength during their labor. Like it gave
Yeah.
them that oomph to keep going, and
Mm.
seeing them in the birth pool and stuff like that. I'm really lucky that my brother and sister-in-law just live around the corner, so I do have that like
Mm.
backup option if like I needed her picked up or anything. So yeah, I'll just
Yeah.
see how it flows.
Wow. And so tell us how you've been preparing for your postpartum now. I know you're only 11 weeks, but it's never too early to start preparing your postpartum. So what
Yes.
do you want to do differently for your next postpartum?
I've sort of just learned a lot more about like postpartum nutrition, and I was a vegan for probably about 5 years. So I am no longer a vegan now, but I've had to relearn a lot of things around like ancestrally, like how we've eaten and things like good fats, and had to work
Mhm.
through a lot of that stuff. But now I feel quite confident. I love cooking, so I definitely want to
Yeah.
prep a lot of meals. One thing that I didn't expect in my first pregnancy was like how hungry you get breastfeeding. And like this things like
Yes.
bliss balls and things like that I found
Yeah.
really helpful. I was really lucky that my sister-in-law she just kept dropping meals to me. She
Yeah.
would just drop all this food to me like every afternoon and just text me and say, "This is at your door." And I was like, "Oh," and it went on for like 2 weeks. So I
Wow,
actually did get fed
beautiful.
pretty well.
Yeah.
But now I'd 100% do a meal train. Yeah, I'd 100% do a meal train, and just really focusing on like I said, just sitting in bed for a few days, and then
Yeah.
doing things around the bed, and then doing things in the home, and yeah, just taking it as slow and less chaotic I can with the other sibling, with the toddler.
Yes.
Just making sure that I'm eating the right things to really fuel, like repair my body and restore my body after birth, but to get through breastfeeding and those newborn days, which I don't think I did a great job at the first time round. So that's probably my goal this time round.
Oh, beautiful. Great. Well, see, I've done an episode with a clinical nutritionist about postpartum depletion, and we spoke all about, that the need to nourish yourself with, nutrient dense food and, everything, because as you said, it's breastfeeding is demanding and it's depleting our reserves of nutrients and so on. And
Yeah,
then
for
obviously
sure.
the birth was exhausting, and postpartum is exhausting as well with the lack of sleep and so on. So putting the right nutrition in our body postpartum, and we know postpartum is not just the first 3 months, it's forever, really. We're forever postpartum after we've had a baby.
Yeah.
Just continuing to look after ourselves, and
Yes.
especially now that you've got a toddler and you're pregnant, so you definitely want to be keeping up with your nutrient stores and so on. Beautiful. Are you still breastfeeding?
Yes, I'm still breastfeeding. Always had like 2 as a goal, but I don't feel like the call to wean. I have started to get a bit of aversion, so I'm just going to see how that plays out. But yeah, I still, especially just like I said, we were really sick. We had RSV back in May, and my daughter couldn't eat for like a week. So just in times like that, like she was still taking the breast, and it just gave me that comfort. Yeah, I find it so helpful for things like that. Yeah, still breastfeeding only like twice a day at the moment. So we'll see how that journey unfolds.
Oh, beautiful. That's a lot of work to have a toddler, to be breastfeeding, to be pregnant. Good on you. Wow. I find breastfeeding to be really interesting around the 2-year mark, because you just never know whether, like, the weaning's probably going to be toddler led at this point. And they become, I guess, kind of emotionally attached after 2, I think. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how, unless I guess you start feeling, like you just can't do it anymore and you have to wean her. But otherwise it'd be quite interesting to see whether you end up almost tandem feeding, like you'd have a newborn and then you'd have Alaska.
That dynamic's going to be interesting. She's such a booby babe, which I can do it because I stay at home with her, so I haven't had to go back to work or anything. But yeah, she definitely loves the boob.
Oh well, you'll see where that takes you then. Hopefully she shares.
I'm like, yeah. She's going through that stage at the moment. Everything's hers. Like I can no longer sneak food off her plate. It's like, no, mummy, mine. Hard transition.
That's funny. Oh, amazing. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing birth story with Alaska, and then telling us, about this new and exciting pregnancy and how you're preparing for it. That sounds really, really interesting, and I wish you all the best for this, for this pregnancy. I wish you well, and I hope you end up having the birth that you feel drawn to, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited.
Yeah, so when is this baby due? Next year, I'm guessing?
Yeah, next year. So I did previously log my periods, so I've still got them in like an app, but probably like late January, early Feb. Or it just depends. For me, it could be late Feb. Just depends how I bake. I tend to bake longer than others. Yeah. But I think they'll choose their birthday, so we'll see.
That's right. Amazing. Well, I wish you all the best, and a very happy new year with a newborn and a toddler, and all the best to you and your family.
Yes. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.